What's up, y'all? Alvin, tech editor at Velo. I'm sitting beside the Haro Rivette, and I'll just cut right to the chase. I think this bike is far better than it has any right to be. Yeah, you heard that right. Haro, the brand that you're used to having like 20-inch mags or 16-inch mags or whatever. I was never into BMX as a kid. Like into BMX racing, that type of thing in the 80s and 90s and early aughts, is now making a road bike. If you look at the spec sheet, it kind of just checks every box. It's got room for 35 mil tires, it has a SRAM UDH, it has internal cable routing, it's got the Aero seat post, it's got a ton of sizes, the geometry chart looks pretty good. And to top it all off, this is a Dura-Ace build, but it comes at $8,500, which is cheaper than a lot of competing bikes with an Ultegra drivetrain. I've had the chance to ride it for the last few months. I've taken it on short rides, I've taken it on long rides, and the overwhelming thought that I had is like, man, this bike is actually really good. I had zero expectations coming in, and I'm gonna tell you why you should have some expectations for this bike and why it should be on your radar when you're looking for your next bike purchase. Okay, so I think it's worth understanding the why of why this bike exists. This Rivette was designed with Lasse Norman Leth, used to be Norman Hansen, multiple-time Olympic track cyclist in both the Omnium and the Madison, but he is Haro's road product director, and he had a big hand in making this bike what it is. So alongside that partnership, or in fact just hiring Lasse Norman Leth to be the director of this bike, Haro even says that they're in the midst of developing a TT bike, which I think is even more surprising and interesting, and an investment in some road racing, to be fair. With that frame design comes, again, that list of features that I think are really appealing. And if it wasn't a Haro, would kind of just stand out as like a really good bike. Key things you've got to know here, this is race geometry, but it isn't pure race. I would say it's slightly more upright than what you might expect from other race bikes out there, with just a hint more stack height across all of the sizes. To note, there are 6 sizes. Other things I like about this, the trail figures are remarkably consistent. They've invested in multiple fork rakes here, and so smaller sizes are getting roughly about 62 millimeters of trail, while the larger sizes are getting about 57 mil trail here too. Being a track cyclist, Haro says that they wanted this bike to be one of the stiffest bikes that they could find and make it a bike that's race ready. Surprisingly, this bike is UCI certified, which I didn't expect, and that kind of just goes to show how serious they are about this bike. So with that comes 3 different builds, 6 sizes in 2 different colorways, including this teal one here with the matching bar tape. There's also a more understated gold, black, and white, which if I were to buy the bike is the direction I would go. They're all Shimano, they're all electronic. So there's a 105 Di2, an Ultegra Di2, and a Dura-Ace Di2, and there is a limited edition 4th version that's coming out. I probably wouldn't go past this bike, because this bike with Shimano Dura-Ace, the Vision 45 SL wheels, and the Silly San Marco saddle with the carbon rails and the Black Tech one-piece integrated bar, it's $8,500. That is a lot of money, to be fair, in an absolute vacuum. However, if you to compare it to other bikes with top spec drivetrains and Dura-Ace wheels and the Vision wheels right here, I think this is remarkably good value, I would say. And I hate that that just came out of my mouth. But if you were to compare this to a Dura-Ace equipped Canyon, that's several $1,000s more. If you were to compare this to a Specialized Tarmac, you're getting a bike here for $8,500, whereas you're paying about $9 grand US for an Ultegra Di2 equipped Tarmac with the one-piece carbon cockpit. That's the same thing with the likes of Trek and Cannondale. Go down the list, and this bike tends to offer more for the money than what you're expecting. Where it starts at about $5 grand for 105 Di2 and the 2-piece cockpit and carbon wheels even still. I think that is great value, and you're still getting the same frame and same checklist of features that I had mentioned below. I think it's worth mentioning the why as to why this exists. After all, you're probably accustomed to seeing a Haro attached to a BMX bike or something with mag wheels, or something that you rode as a kid and not necessarily now. Okay, so why does this bike exceed expectations and why is this bike better than I think it has any right to be? I think the biggest thing first was when I pulled it out of the box and I built it. Built it up, got it to my measurements, got everything set up, and I weighed it. And without pedals, this bike right here, 7.2 kilograms, that is, I think, very competitive at this price point, especially considering the Dura-Ace drivetrain. I think if you were to go to a 105 Di2 bike, it is still pretty comparable as far as weights are concerned. The first ride that I took this on was a relatively long day. There was some climbing, but for the most part, it was just rollers and rollers and rollers. And I was surprised with how well this bike responded when I put power down. It really liked to, I'm gonna not use the phrase maintain speed or keep its speed, but it did a good job of making it feel like, okay, when I put power down, it is going forward and it is going to be stiff. And this bike really is stiff front to back. The handling is really precise. You can kind of just put it into a corner. There isn't any turn in sloppiness or anything like that. It kind of just turns in and goes. I couldn't feel any twisting from the bottom bracket area. Out back, it felt really good too. Under braking, I think the bike is remarkably solid feeling. You can kind of just wail on the brakes at the last moment. In some bikes, you can kind of feel the fork like judder ever so slightly, or you can feel the back of the bike move around or skip around. Not the case here. Very stiff. I will say that I am pretty lightweight. I'm around 60 kilograms or about 130-ish pounds, maybe a tiny bit more at the moment. And I have felt no need for stiffness here, no extra need for stiffness. And considering that Lasse Norman Leth had some say in this, an Olympic track cyclist, I would suspect that heavier set riders and more powerful riders than me won't have any trouble with the stiffness of this bike either. Okay, so it checks all the boxes. It handles remarkably well. I really liked how it both climbed and descended, and I think it's good enough that you could race this bike without any issue. I think the place that surprised me the most was how refined everything else seemed to be. I thought the Black Tech bars were quite nice. I think the ergonomics of them are really good. They have a slight flare in the drops and they match the stiffness of the frame and the fork really well, both in the tops and the drops. Very stiff feeling. The seat post, also kind of stiff feeling. You kind of feel it out back. I wish it was a little bit more comfortable and it smoothed out some of the bumps a little bit more. But all of the bikes come with 30 mil wide tires front and rear, which is an interesting spec and something that I expect to see on more road bikes coming forth too. I was pretty impressed with the design out back, specifically that seat post wedge. I really like that they use an M5 bolt, which means that you're using a 5 mil Allen key. Most of the time you're using a 3 or a 4 mil Allen, which is more compact and it doesn't encourage the rider to over torque the whole thing. The seat post was pretty good too. I mentioned that it's not the most compliant out there for my lighter weight. I did find that there was a touch of creaking there with the seat post wedge interface and the seat post itself. It didn't feel loose or anything like that. I think I just needed more like carbon paste than I expected it to. Even still, I've applied the carbon paste, hasn't been an issue since, but it is something I keep my eye on, and it is something that I worry about a little bit more on this bike than I have on recent road bikes that I've brought in, much less gravel bikes. I would say that besides the seat post, I do think that the computer mount, which is kind of just like a generic 2-bolt computer mount that you put underneath the stem, is pretty heavy. If I were wanting to shave some grams, that is an inexpensive way to do it. I think the 30 mil tires, the Vittoria Corsa Pro Controls here, nice spec. I don't feel like I'm losing out on any performance here for the most part compared to a 28 mil wide tire, and it is more comfortable front to rear. The only thing is that with that stiffness of the bike front to back, you do feel kind of the bigger hits more than you might expect, but the smaller stuff, 30 mil wide tire kind of snuffs out the small vibrations quite nicely. As I mentioned, the build quality I thought was pretty good too, outside of that seat post. Again, it is kind of just the Haro name. You have to decide if it is a brand that I guess resonates with you, and it's going to elicit a lot of reactions from from people for whom the Haro brand really resonates with them. There are a lot of people who stopped me and talked with me, more so than most other bikes that I've received this year, honestly. A lot of people are excited to see that there is a Haro road bike out there. I'm not sure if that's quite enough for them to move from their current road bikes, but people are excited. And if you are excited about this Haro, you'll be pleasantly surprised to know this is a pretty good bike, and it's one that you should be worth considering. That's it. If you have any questions, drop a comment on the Outside Activity feed. Hit me in the DMs and on Instagram, cool_Alvin with a K, or read the story below. How about that? See you on the next one. Happy trails.